How's everybody doing this evening? Guys, it's Nate Zelinsky coming live from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife outlets, both Facebook and Instagram. We always want to start off by saying that. So whether you're watching it on either one of these outlets, if we ask questions or answer questions and you don't think you're seeing them on there, we're going live from many different outlets. So just keep that in mind. If you have a favorite platform, let us know what it is. Obviously, we see different comments, people watching in from all the outlets. But again, we are going live from multiple outlets. Just wanted to throw that out there. And we're very excited to be here. So again, Nate Zelinsky, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. This is our big game hunting series. We've been doing this now for quite a while, and we're excited. It's all about bringing you education, bringing you knowledge, and more so answering questions that hopefully will lead to everyone being a more successful outdoorsman. And like we always say, we have so many options of success. But again, we're going to talk about gear, talk about scouting, talk about obtaining the future tags that are available, and so much that goes forth into these upcoming hunting seasons. So again, this is just the beginning. We're excited about it. Tonight we're actually going to bring you a very digital scouting concept. But we had so many questions on the last feed that kind of went unanswered, and so many questions about gear, methods of take, and kind of just a gamut of questions that we're going live tonight with that. And actually next week we're going to talk about a lot of digital scouting. So again, keep this on your radar. Watch these feeds, watch this page for when we're going live, continuing the big game talk. So we're excited to be here. Now we have to say, this is live. So for everybody that's joining us right now, you have the availability to engage with us. So literally jump down there in the comments and let us know when you have comments, questions. This is about that relationship with us. We're here right now live. We have a whole staff from Colorado Parks and Wildlife available to answer questions. I'm live on camera to ask those questions and answer those questions. So again, this is all about you. You have questions about big game hunting in Colorado, scouting, licensing, legal methods to take, whatever that is. Again, ask those questions. And I promise you right now, there is no question that is dumb or stupid or anything like that. Bring your questions. Now, taken from kind of the survey and the poll we've been watching, we have everything on this feed. So looking at who's been watching and following this big game hunting series, we have people that applied for their very first license right now. We have people that are literally, it's their very first time ever hunting right now. We also have hunters who are literally going on their 30th or 40th year of hunting big game in Colorado. So we know we have a wide audience. But again, that's what this is about, learning from each other, building education, bringing knowledge and information to this platform. So more than anything, engage with us. Type those questions. Tonight is more of a Q&A than we've had yet. So we've gone live multiple times, but we've kind of had an agenda. We've been talking about applying for licensing, talking about scouting, areas to hunt. Tonight we're talking gear, methods of take, answering a lot of questions that we haven't been able to get to. But again, we want more questions. So again, throwing that out there, bring your questions. Tonight's the night. I also want to say, now is a great time to share this page with maybe hunters who might need that knowledge. Only reason I say that, I know that in my hunting circle, I have people that I'm like, man, I just wish Uncle Jim would put a little more effort into his hunts. Right now, share this page, throw it in Messenger. If you know a hunter that is brand new to hunting, or you know a hunter that needs some education in their outdoor life, hit that share button, send it to those people. Let's bring everybody in and let's get tonight started. So again, Nate Zelinsky coming live to the Big Game Hunting Series. First thing we're going to talk about, all our licenses are applied for. We've even got some results back. So if you were a hunter that applied for a sheep or goat tag, those results have been delivered back. So last week, those results came in. So I know that talking to some of you on here, I'm sure there are some very lucky hunters that got a mountain goat tag or a bighorn sheep tag, whether it's a Rocky Mountain or desert. I know that some people were able to draw those tags, and I'm sure you are already starting to scout, starting to prepare for those hunts. And then coming up here over the course of about the next month or so, we're going to hear about moose, we're going to hear about bear, pronghorn, deer and elk and everything else. That's where we're really going to continue all this scouting process. But right now, it's all about the digital scouting. We talk about that, and again, next week we're going to cover it more. But there's so much you can do nowadays as a modern hunter right here from your phone. So literally, in the past, we were trying to look at paper maps. And looking at paper maps, you're like, man, I can't tell. Is that a good creek? Is that dark timber? It was so hard to judge the lay of the land looking at paper maps. But now we have capabilities of Google Earth or Onyx Hunts or so many of the publications, both digitally and print, that's available through Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We can now gain so much intel literally from our living rooms, from your office at work. You can do so much scouting to know what you're dealing with on the digital measure, to where when we actually do get out in the field in May and June, there's so much more opportunity out there because you already know what you're getting into. There's so much information that you can already uphold. So again, this next month is all about digital scouting. We're going to bring you more of that a little bit later in this feed, but again, we just want to talk about that. Every show we talk about the steps of where you should be. Right now, it is all about digital scouting. You're learning everything about the area in which you think you're going to have a hunting tag, or even more so, a backup plan. Hey, if I'm unsuccessful in the primary draw, let's look at over-the-counter opportunities. Again, they're all in the Big Game Hunting brochure. Look at the over-counter stuff, because there's so much opportunities, even if you're not in the big game draw. If you didn't apply or you're unsuccessful, there's so much stuff. You should be scouting everything, because it's all at your fingertips, so keep that in mind. We also want to talk about some other current things that are happening right now before we really jump into the gear and the methods of take and all the Q&A in this show. Number one, a big date coming up this coming weekend. We have the opening of basically the large portion of the shed hunting. In reality, you know, back in the day, finding a shed, you know, finding an antler that an animal dropped, it was cool, right? You're hunting, you pick one up, you're like, this is great. In the past couple of years, it has full-blown become a sport. I know as many hunters that participate in the shed hunting opportunities of being out in the field as much as they do actually physically hunting. The shed hunting sport has blown up, and people have dogs looking for sheds and everything else. So we want to touch base on that. The shed hunting season has been closed from January 1st. It opens up on May 1st. Still check your regulations. I know there's certain valleys, certain regions that still have some closures there, but a big portion of that is available starting May 1st. The only reason we're talking about it tonight, we tie a lot of the shed hunting into our scouting. So here's one of those things. If you're approaching a new hunting area, somewhere you've never been before, or you're looking at an area of, I've always wondered if this is a good spot. By getting out shed hunting, number one, you're going to get out and you're going to learn the area. So you're going to get a good feel for the access points, for the terrain, for what's, you know, true bedding areas, what's a feeding area, where are the water holes at. So by getting out and shed hunting, you're going to, number one, you're going to learn the lay of the land, which is a great thing to have. But number two, it tells us two things. Number one, it's going to tell us a good idea of the maturity level of the animals in that area. So when you're going out and finding antlers that deer have dropped and elk have dropped, you're going to get a good idea of the general population. How many young animals are in there, immature animals are in that area, how many mature animals are in the area. And we always say that when the animals get to the point where they drop their sheds for the year, they get into that February time frame where they're dropping their sheds, they've made it through a good portion of that winter. So we always say that if they drop their sheds, more than likely they made it through the winter. So many of your winter kills, everything coming from old age, from a wound during hunting season, so many of the things that are going to really hurt this animal's population happens before they drop their sheds. Once they drop their antlers for the year, generally speaking, we always say as hunters that they've made it through the season. So when you find a shed, more than likely that animal is still alive. And it's just a good concept of saying, hey, these animals made it. So if he dropped his shed, this animal is going to be here for me to hunt in the coming future. So those are the biggest things that we talk about shed hunting. Well, that's the reason we wanted to bring it up on the show. Is one, it's opening up, so it's a great reason to get out there in the field. And number two, and most importantly, it's going to give you a good idea of the maturity level, the amount of animals that you have there, and what survived the winter. So keep that in mind, because shed hunting is a big portion of building intel on the upcoming hunting season. Because if you follow this feed, we are all about education within the field. We want to know everything. There's no surprises and there's no excuses. When we're out hunting this fall and tag in hand and it's opening day, there's no excuses. We're not surprised by anything. We've done enough scouting. We know everything that's coming in place. So keep that in mind. Now, we want to start jumping into some of the Q&A and some of the stuff that we've been getting so many questions on. And again, bring your questions, bring your comments. Now is the time for that. So on the last live feed, we started to get into gear. When we're talking about gear, everything from methods of take, which is going to be rifles, muzzleloaders, archery equipment, everything from optics. When we talk about scouting, we talk about so much use through spotting scopes and binoculars and all that stuff. I mean, everything down to boots and clothing and packs. And when we started to get into that gear section, we kind of ran out of time, and we had so many comments on all these feeds about that gear. So that's what the main point of tonight's show is talking about gear. So we're going to jump right into that. As you have comments, again, make sure you bring those questions live. We're going to talk about it right now. But if any of you have anything to do with going to an outdoor retailer, let's say you've been to the local retailers or the local sporting goods store in your area. Let's say we wanted to go out and do some general shooting. Obviously, that ammunition sales, firearm sales are fairly high right now, and honestly, the availability of product is fairly low. Now, if we're going out there for general shooting, you know, we're getting handgun casings or general shooting supplies, I wouldn't say we're necessarily worried about obtaining that type stuff. If it's a situation of all of a sudden, hey, we need to get ready for hunting season, that is where it does come somewhat of a concern. So as we look forth to the hunting season, we want to make sure that we can get the ammunition that we're going to hunt with, and we can practice with it all summer. I know a lot of hunters or shooters, especially on the new side, so they're fairly new to the sport. You know, you go out and buy one box of ammunition, and you dial in your rifle, then all of a sudden hunting season comes around, and you're like, I'm going to switch it up. Not every rifle and not all ammunition shoots equally. Honestly, especially as you start shooting at somewhat of a distance, that type of stuff drastically changes your 0 points, and it drastically flies different. Honestly, I can take a handful of rifles and I can shoot the same style bullet, same, you know, brand, and none of the rifles will shoot it the same. Every rifle is going to like a certain cartridge, a certain bullet, a certain weight. And they're going to shoot it better than others. So right now, especially when ammunition is scarce, now is the time to shoot various cartridges through your rifle and find out what really shoots right. And that's a major thing that we want to talk about, because with today's rifles, today's optics, today's bullets, the sky's the limit, and performance is at its all-time peak. You can now do things that you've never been able to do before. So again, whether that is shooting a little further or shooting a little better, or just everything in the shooting realm, it is better than it's ever been, but it takes time at the range, and obviously you want to make the most of those valuable resources, so keep that in mind. So make sure if you're getting into the shooting sport, find that ammo, do some research. You know, if you have to order it, anticipate a longer wait to get that ammunition delivered. But again, now is the time to do that. I say this, and I know some people are like, you're crazy, man. You know, it's end of April. Hunting season is not until October or November with a rifle. Why am I worried about that now? I promise you, by the time you order it now, get it in, shoot it, decide if you like it, not like it, order more, order something different. Hunting season will be rolling around by the time you make all of those little changes, so keep that in mind. Now is the time. Now, as we talked about shooting sports, I had a lot of questions on that last live feed saying, hey, I'm a brand new shooter, what do I get? You know what I mean? Like, you go to the average sporting goods store and you look at rifles, there is everything out there. I mean, you have your traditional calibers, you know, your 270, your 30-06, all of those type firearms. But then you have some of the newer stuff. Newer stuff maybe being like a Creedmoor, or more recent, like a PRC or a Nosler. Now all of a sudden, some of the traditions that our grandfathers and fathers and, you know, our past family members have been hunting with no longer are as popular. Now there's a lot of other cartridges out there. In reality, hitting your target is your main goal. I don't really care what you shoot, and I can promise you that right now. You know, a firearm, they all do their purpose. The main goal is to choose a caliber that you like, that you're comfortable with, and practice, 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 practice. You can have the most state-of-the-art, you know, caliber out there, but if you don't practice, you don't find the right ammunition, it's not going to be good for you. So at the end of the day, find a caliber that you shoot well with, shoot it often, and that's what's going to lead to a more successful hunting season. Now, before we jump into it, we always want to make sure, for lack of better terms, that you have enough gun for the hunt that you're coming up on. So we always talk about that because, again, you don't want to have a caliber that is too small going into, say, a moose hunt. or something like that. Now, there's also ways to be overkill in those situations, but always make sure that you have an appropriate caliber for the hunts that you're going on. Now, with that being said, you can always grab your big game brochure, look at that. You can pull up legal methods of take. It's going to have your caliber restrictions. You know, most of the big game in Colorado, you have to be shooting a 24 caliber or larger. In muzzleloader, you know, for your elk and your larger species, it's going to be a 50 caliber or larger, and vice versa. So make sure you check out all those regulations to make sure you're legal, and then select what's going to be best for you. The biggest thing, what I look for personally in a rifle, I want a very flat shooting rifle, and I want a rifle that's going to perform in all situations. So I don't necessarily think about the power on impact, you know, to take down an elk or take down a moose. What I want to look for is a rifle that's going to allow me to make a flawless shot, because that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Being able to hit your target extremely accurate is going to lead to more success at the end of the day. So for me, I want a firearm that's going to be flat shooting to where overall distance, if I misjudge the distance by a few yards, it's not going to take me out of that major, you know, zone to create a very lethal shot. I'm also looking at things to be able to shoot through the wind, shoot through maybe wind and snow, and that's going to be the ideal caliber for me. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about caliber before we take some questions is I want to talk about bullet selection. Now, this is probably the biggest thing. You know, I'm sitting here and I have a bunch of different, you know, cartridges that are built right here. I have a pile of them behind me, and everything has its purpose, and that's the biggest thing that I want to talk about. I want to talk about understanding a bullet that you're going to shoot out of your firearm. Biggest thing with that, when you look at purchasing a cartridge in a firearm and the bullet that you're going to shoot as a projectile out of that firearm, you're going to have bullets that are harder. So when we talk about that, you're going to have less expansion, it's going to be a harder bullet, you're going to get great penetration, but not as much expansion out of that bullet. You're going to have other bullets that are designed very soft, that are all about major expansion, almost like a ballistic tip, a very soft bullet that is meant to expand drastically upon impact. The biggest thing is understanding that. So if you find a bullet that shoots very good out of your firearm, I'm not saying that you have to have a very hard bullet. I'm not saying you have to go seek a very soft bullet. The biggest thing is understanding what bullet you're shooting. So keep this in mind and let this sink in your head very good. If you're shooting that softer bullet, so your rifle is shooting a bullet that is very soft, shoots very well. When you're taking a shot on a live animal in the field, you want to make sure that you're taking that double lung shot. You are behind the shoulder. If you're shooting a soft bullet, you have got to shoot on softer tissue on that animal to where you get penetration and you make a very lethal shot on that animal. If you're shooting that very hard bullet, again, less expansion. That's a bullet that you could shoot that animal in that shoulder. Again, the heart's going to be tucked in, kind of protected by that shoulder blade. That harder bullet's going to be built to hit that shoulder, have a harder impact, to get that expansion, to do what it needs. If you have an all-around bullet, it's going to be kind of not soft, not hard, a little bit more engineered of a bullet. That's going to be a situation that you can shoot either place. The only reason I talk about this, we're going to cover this actually a little bit more in summer, but the biggest thing is understanding that bullet, because right now is when everybody's ordering those bullets. They're ordering the cartridges they're going to hunt with. You need to know if it's soft, you're going to be fairly limited on your shot. If it's a harder bullet, you're going to be fairly limited on your shot. If it's a little bit more of an engineered bullet, again, kind of that middle ground, you have more versatility on where you're going to shoot that animal. Because again, all that comes into play. When I talk about hunters who have had that devastating loss where they lose recovery of that animal, those are the type of things that sometimes can be changed by your bullet. So many people overlook that. They think that all ammunition is created the same, but all these bullets perform differently, and understanding what that bullet's doing is a major thing upon you as the hunter. That is your job, and you owe it to these animals to know what's happening, know what that bullet's doing, to where you can make the most efficient shot possible and create that harvest in the field. So keep that in mind. Do we have any questions on firearms? Where we're going?
Yeah, a new hunter is wondering, do you know of options for them to try out different firearms? They don't have a family member or a friend that has some options for them.
So we talked about this last time. Honestly, this is one of those things that's kind of changing almost weekly, but there are some firearm ranges in Denver that allow rental and or use of hunting rifles. So the biggest thing, if you look up shooting ranges, like on the front range of Denver. If it's strictly a pistol range, more than likely they're going to have pistol options, handgun options to use, try, borrow, lease, but they're not going to necessarily have any hunting rifles. So look up rifle ranges. If a rifle range has that 100-yard range, those are the type places to call. And look, I know that last time we did some research, we found 2 or 3 options. I know their phone was blowing up, but just jump on there, look up rifle ranges on the front range, and give them a call and say, hey, I'm a new hunter, I'm looking to shoot some firearms, and quite a few of them actually do that. And honestly, so many people are trying out, testing the handgun options. The rifle ranges are not getting as much use, believe it or not. So make sure you do that. Look up rifle ranges, give them a call, and that's a great way to do it. Because honestly, again, there's so much versatility, and being good with that firearm is everything. So if you've never shot a firearm and all of a sudden you're having a very large caliber rifle in your hands, it's a big bang. It's a lot of recoil, and it can throw you off. And the last thing that you want to do is to be scared of your firearm. So that's a great thing to do. Go shoot various firearms and know what your limit is. Hey, this kicked too much. This is a perfect recoil. This firearm's too heavy for me to carry. This one's lighter, and they all have their time and place. So do that. And I will say to all the new hunters out there, there's a lot of options in the shotgunning version of this. So you can go to your various sporting clay clubs, and there's a lot of them. I mean, Kiowa Creek and Colorado Clays. And on the shotgun side, there's a lot of availability of use of a shotgun. And the biggest thing I talk about that, going out on the range, shooting sporting clays, it's entertaining, it's fun, but shooting a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge, more than anything is going to get you used to recoil. I say this to so many youth hunters on the youth side. If you're new to hunting, go out there, spend a lot of time behind a shotgun. It's going to be less recoil. It's going to be a slower recoil than on a rifle, but it's going to get used to that. You're going to get used to the noise. You're going to get used to the recoil. So then when you get behind a rifle, it's going to be less dramatic. So keep that in mind. But yes, to answer the question, there's a lot of ranges that have that, but just some general tips. Call around, shoot various calibers, but spend some time behind a shotgun. One day, shooting 50 or 100 sporting clays, it's going to break your shoulder in. But I promise you, even though you might be sore the next day, when you get behind that rifle, it'll definitely help you out and just make you a little bit more comfortable behind that firearm. So do keep that in mind. So any other questions on rifles?
Do you have a recommendation of how much ammo I should carry out in the field?
Absolutely. So this is one of those things that I talk to so many hunters, right, and they all have the same confident attitude. We've all heard this, like, how much ammo do you carry when you're out there? I was like, I only need one shot, right? I can tell you right now that I shoot somewhat professionally. I spend a lot of time behind a firearm, and I always carry extra ammunition in the field. So honestly, ammunition is heavy. We all look at this box of ammo right here. This is a 6.5 Creedmoor. This is a 300 PRC. That's heavy. A box of ammo is heavy. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself carrying too much. But generally speaking, I'm going to say that a magazine on the average firearm is going to hold 3 or 4 rounds. So I generally have that. And then on the buttstock of my rifle, I actually carry a sleeve. So on the sleeve of my rifle, I'm always going to have a device to hold extra ammunition. Generally speaking, those hold 9. So I almost always have 9 on the buttstock of my rifle. I have the 3 or 4 that's going to be engaged in the magazine of that rifle when I'm out hunting. So that's going to bring me to that 12, 13, depending on which various forms you have. So that's generally my rule of thumb. So I'm almost always 12 to 15 rounds with me in regards to that. Now, one thing that I will say that I do, I've been hunting my entire life. I mean, last year I spent 100-something days in the field, and this is something that's been a tradition my entire life. I always carry 1 extra bullet in my pocket. So I have 3 or 4 in the magazine, I have the buttstock carrier, full of ammunition, and I always have 1 spare in my pocket. It's one of those things that, bad situation, you always have to stop and think, calm down, cool down. As you find that last one, it's always that calm down that'll kind of get your wits together and help you out there. But generally speaking, in almost all situations, I'm almost always going to carry that 12 to 15 to kind of keep that in mind. Generally speaking, it's almost always overkill, but it's one of those situations that we owe it to the animals. We owe that situation to make sure we have enough to get everything done. But hopefully you never need more than 1 in all those situations. So, any other questions on that? Perfect. Awesome. So we got a lot of other things coming up, a lot of other questions about lead methods of take, but we're going to kind of roll with that. I'm going to jump to muzzleloader right now. Probably one of the more premier tags in the state right now. We see more and more muzzleloaders joining the field, and it's for various reasons. So we see so many muzzleloaders growing in popularity for, number one, the weather. There's so many hunters that don't want to go to a cold hunting camp. They don't want to spend their time in October and November, you know, whether it's they don't have the vehicle to get through the snow. They don't want to deal with camping in those colds. Muzzleloader being the middle of September in most areas, it offers a very pleasant weather condition. So we're seeing popularity in muzzleloader for that reason. Number two, the opportunity to hunt elk in the rut. So hunting elk when they're in their prime vocalization, the prime breeding of the season. So we see that popularity. So either way, muzzleloader is growing. With that, we always want to talk about muzzleloaders. I think that as a state of our opportunities of muzzleloading, it's popular, but so many people apply for a tag before looking into the regulations. So in Colorado, a muzzleloader has to have iron open sights. So we're talking about open sights, whether they're fiber optic, iron, whatever the case may be, it has to be an open sight. You are not allowed to use scope or optics on your muzzleloader here in Colorado during the muzzleloader season. So that's one thing. We're not allowed to use sabots. A sabot is going to be a plastic casing that engulfs all the way around the bullet, allowing you to basically shoot like a 30 caliber bullet out of a 50 caliber muzzleloader. That's called a sabot. That is not allowed in Colorado. We're also not allowed to use powder pellets. So powder pellets is going to be taking 50 grains of powder, it engulfs it into a small pellet that you drop down your barrel. So we're a little bit more on the premium, or on the more premier side of things. So with that in mind, your open sights, you're shooting a solid bullet. Again, of those regulations, we can drop that in here as far as what regulations are allowed. But for most of the big game hunting, at least your elk, your moose, things like that, you're going to be at a 50 caliber. For some of the smaller species, there's availability for some 45 caliber. But again, you're shooting that larger caliber. And even I think in round ball, I think it's 54 caliber. But you're shooting, again, that solid one-piece bullet. So that's one thing. You're shooting raw powder, again, so that's another opportunity, and you have to be open sight. So those are the biggest things that changes the game here in Colorado. So make sure you know that. So if you applied for a muzzleloader tag and you're new to the sport, or it's one of those things that you didn't quite know what the regulations were, that is what you're dealing with in Colorado. So make sure that you practice with that. Same type thing. Powder, fairly hard to find right now. Bullets for that muzzleloader are somewhat hard to find. The only reason I really want to touch base on muzzleloading here in Colorado is for the fact that, let's just say I have a 50 caliber muzzleloader. So I have a 50 caliber muzzleloader I'm planning on hunting. If you go to the average retailer and buy 50 caliber bullets, there's a lot of sway in the manufacturing side of muzzleloader bullets. When you look at a 50 caliber muzzleloader bullet, there's a large variance. So you could buy one brand of muzzleloader bullets, go to your 50 caliber muzzleloader, drop that bullet in, and it might slide all the way down to the bottom of the bore, literally to the ignition point, and barely make contact with your threads. There's other 50 caliber muzzleloader brands that you might put it in there, and you might barely be able to get it through the rifling. There's so much variance in there. I encourage the muzzleloaders out there to buy multiple brands, see what fits best. And that's going to be a huge opportunity to you to shoot better and have more capabilities out of your firearms. So keep that in mind. So the biggest thing we're going to touch base with on muzzleloaders, bullets are not in the same category as far as muzzleloading bullets go. So keep that in mind. Try different brands, see what fits your barrel best, and see what shoots best out of yours. I know there is one manufacturer out there that if you buy a 50 caliber, bullet for that muzzleloader, they'll send you a test pack of 4 bullets. You drop each one in to see which one fits best, and then you order that particular, variation of a 50 caliber, and that's going to shoot best out of your firearm. So just keep that in mind within variations of muzzleloading. Try lots and lots of bullets until you see what shoots best. Keep that in mind. Again, I'm going to keep moving on. If we have more, questions and concerns, comments on muzzleloading, happy to answer. Do we have any at the very moment? Perfect. We're going to talk about archery next. So, in regards to archery, again, very much a growing in popularity sport. The opportunity to hunt in a longer season. The opportunity, more so just people talk about archery equipment and more the variations to shoot all summer, the practice, the athletics, everything that kind of goes into the realm of what makes archery archery. So we're going to talk about archery. In that, you have traditional, which is going to be your recurve, your longbow. You have your modern mechanical vertical bow, which is going to be a cam-driven bow. There's so much in the sport of archery. We could have a 2-hour seminar strictly talking about archery and what goes on with it. But I'm going to talk about the few main things. We had a lot of questions from new archers. So number one we're going to talk about is the poundage to draw. I see so many hunters that have questions about archery equipment, and when they get forth to archery equipment, they ask the same thing. I'm going elk hunting, right? So I'm going to grab a bow right now. I'm stepping on a frame, but all right. So I grab a bow like this, right? And so many people are like, I'm going on an elk hunt. This bow's set to 70 pounds. I have to shoot 70 pounds. And then they go to draw, and they're like, oh, I can't even pull it back. And, you know, they're pointing the thing up to the moon to try to get it drawn back. Then they finally draw it back, and they're so tired they can barely shoot. With a lot of the opportunities with the archery equipment nowadays, the equipment's better than ever. It's producing more energy than ever. They're faster than ever. The biggest thing, much like the rifle, if you're scared to shoot your rifle, you're not going to be accurate with your rifle. With modern bows, I see so many people that want to have that 70, 80-pound bow, but they should really be shooting a 50-pound bow. You have the lethal capabilities out of some of those lower poundage bows to create a very accurate shot. Accuracy is everything. With today's broadheads, weight of your arrow, as long as you are accurate, you will be successful. So right now, to all the new hunters out there, if you're archery hunting, don't think you have to have the most powerful bow out there. Make sure that you're comfortable drawing it, as long as you are your legal weights, which again, in that section where we talked about legal methods to take, it talks about all the poundages that makes a legal bow here in Colorado. As long as you're shooting that legal bow, you're going to be fine. Again, dial in your arrow, dial in your broadhead to that situation, and you're going to be fine. So the number one tip to archery, don't go too heavy to where you're not accurate, to where you're hurting your shoulder, to where you're not drawing smoothly. Again, you're going to have to draw as that animal approaches. You have to be quiet, smooth, subtle. Make sure your equipment reflects that. Now, we're going to talk about two things with archery, then we're going to jump into a lot of questions. I see them popping up here. The two things that we're going to talk about, number one, right now, is with an arrow. So, obviously, in realms to archery equipment and arrows, there's a lot that goes into it. You go to an average archery range and you look, you're going to have hundreds of arrows to choose from. I'm going to give you a couple things. Number one, trust the local archery shop. They're going to set you up with an arrow. So, you're going to look at your draw length and your draw weight, and it's going to tell you the flexibility of an arrow that's going to shoot best out of your bow. Too soft of an arrow will not be accurate. Too stiff of an arrow will not be accurate. As an arrow flies, it's going to flex and then straighten out upon release. So the biggest thing is you want to match your draw length with your draw weight to create a stiffness of shaft that's going to fly best for you. Only thing I'm going to talk about, I tend to shoot a heavier arrow than a lighter arrow. So in regards to that, when you go to your local archery range and they select an arrow, you're almost always going to be able to go on the heavier side or the lighter side. So when I pick my broadhead weight, when I talk about an insert, when I look at my overall arrow, I want an arrow that is slightly heavier than lighter. Not saying you have to go crazy heavy, but when in archery equipment, everybody looks at their bow and they go, man, I want that bow right there. I saw an ad for it. It shoots 350 feet a second. I want that. But to do that, you're shooting an extremely light arrow. Sure, it's cool at the range when your arrow gets there so fast you can't see it. Sure, it sounds cool. Sure, it's cool that you don't have a lot of pins on your bow because your arrow shoots so flat. But we're hunting. We are literally trying to harvest an animal with a primitive weapon like this, an arrow, a stick flying through the air. What matters most is hitting accurate and creating a lethal shot on the game that you're hunting. The cool factor does not come into play. So when we're selecting archery equipment, a slightly heavier arrow is going to deliver more kinetic impact, more kinetic energy on impact. It's going to create a more vital shot. The other thing that a heavy arrow will do for you, as an arrow flies, let's just say that animal is not perfectly broadside. If you hit a rib, if you have a too light of an arrow, it will reflect, it will retract, it will move and not continue on its point of shot, and sometimes not create a vital shot. If you have a heavier arrow, the direction it's flying, when it hits on target, it will never veer off of that target. It will go straight through and create that vital shot. So a heavier arrow is going to be more beneficial to the average hunter than not. Again, type your comments in here. We can talk about arrows in the comments later. Again, it could be an hour-long seminar. But a heavier arrow is going to do better than a lighter arrow. On the tip of that arrow, you're going to have your broadhead. In realms to your broadhead here in Colorado, you have to have at least, I believe, a 7/8 inch cutting diameter. So you have to have a certain width broadhead, and you have to have some variations within the specs of that broadhead. Long story short, we're going to break it down into 3 style broadheads. You have a traditional broadhead like this. This is going to be a 3-blade, semi-cut on contact, but you have a head, then you move into blades. That's a very traditional broadhead. It's a 1-inch cutting diameter. You have extremely modern broadheads, which are going to be the latest craze. This is called a mechanical. So this folds down to something very small, shoots like a field tip. Upon impact, this opens up and creates a much larger cutting diameter to, again, be more lethal upon that shot. And then your last phase is going to be what's called a cut on contact. It's almost like a spearhead. From the second that broadhead hits, it is immediately cutting. So that's a cut on contact head. Again, we had some questions on this last time. Honestly, it comes back just to like the bullet. Shoot what shoots best for you. If you're shooting extremely fast bow, a lot of times your only option is going to be that mechanical. If your bow is a little bit more on the average side of speed, you're going to shoot any of those. Me personally, I'm all about the traditional broadhead. Even though everything has changed in the archery world in the last 5-10 years, that traditional head, it flies good, it's extremely strong, and it never ever lets me down. So that type head right there is great for me. You ask personal advice, that's what I shoot. But again, there's so much opportunity. This is, again, probably the latest craze. A mechanical that runs really well, cuts the most amount of flesh upon impact. It's great. I just don't like things that are mechanical. Your chuck sleeve is breaking down, ATVs break down, everything that moves at some point in time has the option to break. Not saying it will, but it could. Again, that cut on contact head is very traditional, and it very rarely lets me down in the field. So that is my take on archery equipment. I know that was the fast spell, but we had so many questions on it. We wanted to get to it. Now I'm going to jump to some questions before we kind of continue on some of the past questions that we've had.
So between a spotting scope, binos, or a rangefinder, in your opinion, what is the most important optic you would purchase?
Well, I'm not going to lie. We're going to move right past that question because I can't answer it. In regards to that, optics is everything. You see, we have some optics sitting here, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to kind of tie them all in together. Honestly, you have to have binos. You can't go without. So binos are hands down the primary focus because you're going to have them with you at all times. You're going to be constantly glassing through them. They are a must. Now, as we get into the scouting portion, we talk about digital scouting now, but in June and July on the same big game hunting series, the same feed you're watching right now, sometimes we're going to be going live from the field, and I'm going to be sitting behind spotting scopes like we have right here, and we're going to be viewing game. A lot of times I might even throw my phone on a phone scope, and I might show you game through this live on this feed. So a spotting scope is a must for me because it allows me to see further. So in a scouting situation, my spotting scope is primary, hands down. Scouting, I spend 90% of the time behind this and less time through binoculars. In the actual hunting realm, I spend more time behind binoculars than I do my spotting scope. I wouldn't be able to choose between binoculars and a spotting scope because I think they're both very highly important. I will say, let's just say you're on a budget. I mean, we're all on a budget, let's face it. But if you said, hey, I have X amount of dollars to spend, I would spend more money on a spotting scope and less money on my binoculars. The binoculars, I'm just looking to find an animal. Even if it's blurry, I found them. I then look through my spotting scope and find exactly what I'm looking at. So in regards to the two, I would spend more money on a spotting scope than I would binoculars, but they're both very important. As far as a rangefinder, making a lethal shot is our focus, right? Not just because I'm coming to you from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife page. As a hunter, as conservation, as an outdoorsman, as anything, again, we owe it everything to these animals that we're pursuing in the field. So making a lethal shot is everything. You have to dedicate the practice, the time, the energy to making that good shot. And with that comes range finding. Knowing how to range find is everything. And I can't tell you how many times that I'm in the field where I'm like, I know that's 100 yards, and you range it, and you're like, man, it's 220 yards. I can't believe it. You know, things change in the field. So knowing range, again, I can't say you can't have one or the other, but a rangefinder is very important. All of these are going to offer expensive options and on the very inexpensive options. So keep that in mind. Now, I will say, as far as the rangefinder goes, I carry a set of binoculars that has a rangefinder built into it. So this particular set of binoculars is a 10 by 42 set of binoculars, which we'll talk about in a second. But right here, I have a rangefinder built in. Now, when you look at these at a local retailer, they probably are selling for, you know, over $1,000. And everybody sees it and they're like, that's crazy. But by the time you would buy a decent pair of binoculars and a rangefinder, a lot of times you're almost at that value. So I just keep that in mind. So for me, somebody who spends so much time behind glass, I mean, I will literally look through my binoculars well over 150 days a year. And there's days where I will do 12 hours of nothing but glassing. So for me, I put way more money into my binocular, my spotting scope than I do my rifles, my scopes, or anything like that. Because again, scouting is everything for me. I mean, you already have seen this through the feed, but you're going to see it more. Scouting is everything. So optics are everything to me. So range finding binoculars, to me, it's a savings because I would spend this, you know, a lot of money on a rangefinder, a lot of money on binos. To have them together is actually a huge savings. So that's what I do in regards to that. Keep that in mind. As far as what you're looking for out of those optics, we'll just jump into this and cover that kind of why we're here. You have smaller optics, you have larger optics, you have more powerful optics, the list goes on and on. Generally speaking, as you add power, so as you add magnification, you lose light. So keep that in mind. So much of your opportunity as you go to like a 10 by 50 or more magnification, you know, 12 by 56 or whatever the case may be, as you get more power, they have a harder time going through light. So those key moments of first light, last light, right when it's that first legal shooting light, right that last legal shooting light, sometimes having less power is going to provide an opportunity to see better. So that's the benefit of slightly less power. But if you go on the opposite spectrum, you go with very minimal power, minimal objective, you just can't see as far and you can't quite tell what you're looking at. So I judge it on my situation. Like when I go whitetail hunting and I'm in, you know, Wisconsin or I'm in Illinois, you know, I'm looking a couple hundred yards and that's it. And I'll go with a much smaller set of optics, you know, a 6 by 32, an 8 by 32, because I don't need the power. I'm looking close range. But all of a sudden, when I'm on tree line looking far, I want a little bit more. Honestly, the true ultimate for me is going to be an 8 or a 10 by 42. So an 8 by 42 or a 10 by 42 as a Western hunter, pronghorn, elk, deer, mountain goats, whatever you're hunting, that 8 or 10 by 42 is going to be the ultimate lens and ultimate power and objective for most hunters. So anybody hunting Colorado, that 8 or 10 by 42, these are 10 by 42s, that's probably the ultimate in that range for what you're looking at there. So kind of keep that in mind. That's huge for me. As far as spotting scopes go, this is where you want a lot of power. I know a lot of hunters that don't want to carry this big of thing in their pack. They don't want to carry a large spotting scope with them. For me, it's about seeing far. I can't tell you how many times I've literally sat and looked at elk 5 miles away. This is how I find animals. This is how I judge what they are, their maturity level. This is how I judge their behavior, what they're doing. This is my eyes in the field. So I do spend some money on this, and I want power. I want a lot of power in regards to this. So this particular optic here is a 27 by, I believe, 80. So 27 by 80 on the power. Absolutely awesome piece of optics. It gets the job done. So keep that in mind. So on the spotting scope side, again, if you have the money to spend or if you're balancing your budget, I would spend more money on this than anything else, and you do want power. They make a lot of smaller ones fit in your backpack. Your binoculars can do that. When it comes to long-range glassing, do yourself a favor and grab the higher power, the higher magnification. It will get the job done. As far as the setup here, again, I got my spotting scope on top. That's the particular piece of optics. It's a Vortex. Then you have your tripod. Tripod is a love-hate relationship. I'm not going to lie. When I am sitting, at my truck or I'm making a quick half-mile hike, I'll carry a big tripod with me. The bigger the tripod, the more sturdy the tripod, the much more clear things are going to be. Nothing's moving around. The wind's not blowing it. It makes life great. But in reality, there's times where I'm going to hike 8, 10, 15 miles. Last year, I think I had 4 different hunts. We were forced to do almost 20 miles in a day. When it comes to doing a 20-mile hike, I can tell you right now, I am not carrying a big tripod with me. So I want the smallest tripod possible. So again, it's a love-hate situation. I would say almost all times I am going with the smaller tripod because you never know when that little 1-mile hike is going to turn into a 4 or 5-mile hike. Weight almost always becomes an issue, and the lighter that you can go, the more physical you can be. So in regards to that, I do go with a lighter tripod. Now you do want to make sure that you still have enough adjustment to go high, to whether you want to be on your knees, whether you want to stand. More importantly, if you're on a hill slope, can you put that lower leg 4 feet down to where this one can adjust for any sort of angle that you're on? So you do want to make sure you have a tripod that's capable of doing whatever you want. But in regards to it, lighter is almost always going to be better to get you through that. And honestly, for me, I'm using a tripod for hiking, and in so much of my time, I will park my vehicle, and I'll be looking way up on a mountainside. So I might be, again, 3, 4 miles away, but a window mount is huge in those regards. So I almost always have a window mount available, and then I have my tripod for hiking around. That's kind of the best for me. Now another question why we're talking optics. Right here, I have an angled spotting scope and I have a straight spotting scope. Everybody wants to know what's the difference, which one should I get. If I'm going to buy a spotting scope, what is the advantage? I can tell you right now, the advantage is speed. So, straight spotting scope. I look up, look through my binoculars, I'm on one hill, I'm looking across valley a half mile, and there's elk about to walk into the trees. With this spotting scope, I can spread that tripod. I can get down. I can find an animal in the spotting scope in a second. I can find everything that I'm looking at in this in no time. All of a sudden, I see it in the spotting scope. I look up. I can see it with my bare eye. I know where they're at. So this is fast as far as locating and transferring from the optic to my own eye to know where they are at. All of a sudden, when you're on the angled spotting scope, I can't tell you how many times I'm on the hillside, I'm glassing like this, and all of a sudden I'm looking over here on my shoulder. So now I got the angled piece turned down, I'm looking to the side, and I find the animal, and I'm like, where's he at? I'm like, where's he? And you're trying to figure out where you're looking because you have the angle. It's slow. You see an elk across the hill. It takes you a little while to figure out where they are because of that angle. You guys are laughing right now. You're like, man, you can't find one in the spot scope? I look through glass, again, more times in a year than I don't. But regardless, I'm just telling you the angle is slow. The true benefit of the angle, and this is the truth of the matter, is number one, from one sitting position. With that straight, you have to move your body so much. With the angle, I can sit in one position, body forward, and by being able to tilt that eyepiece, I can rotate to a hard degree to my right, a hard degree to my left. I can go up and down, so I can cover more ground from one seating position with angle than I can with the straight. So again, even though it's slower to find my target, I can cover more ground from one position with an angle. The other and probably most benefit of an angle, how many times are you out in the field and it's windy? I don't know about you, but I swear I am always in the wind. I can't find a calm day to hunt to save my life. I do use the smaller tripod. So I have that small tripod right there. When I'm out in the field and it's windy, with a straight angle, with a straight scope versus an angled scope, for me to get to my eye, I have to have the tripod elevated quite a bit to see this. On a windy day, the more elevation, the more wobble I get. So again, imagine my eye looking straight through the scope. So I'm looking straight. If I have the angle, all of a sudden I can lower that 6, 8, 10 inches, and I can get it out of the wind. So the angled spotting scope allows me to drop the tripod and make it more stable. If I can only pick one, I would almost go with angled at all times. I do have both. I use both. When I'm in a hunt, in a situation, I scout with the angled more because time's not necessary. I'm not rushed. In a hunting situation, so many times I'm presented with that fast-paced type hunt to where I a lot of times go straight so I can make quicker decisions. So keep that in mind. Any other questions on spotting scopes, or we cover a good portion of them?
I have one more gear question for you, and I do have a couple scouting questions I'd like you to be able to get to. So this question is, besides a gun and optics, what is the most important piece of gear to get for a new hunter?
Absolutely. I would say that, honestly, before I even buy optics or anything else, I almost always start with my pack. A hunting pack, you're going to carry gear. No matter what. I mean, I have various gear for every hunt that I go on. You have to carry water. So water is a must. So you have to have water with you. So that is a key feature. You have to carry some sort of supplies. When I say supplies, I'm talking life, first aid, and just general things. So I have my snacks. I have my warmer gear, so extra pair of gloves, a puffy jacket. I have my first aid, which can be as minimal or as extreme as you're looking for. And then you have all the other gear that takes place. So a pack is number one. So get yourself a pack. What I look for in a pack that can carry my water, carry all my gear, and I always want to be able to take one trip to the truck with some portion of the animal. So upon harvest a deer or an elk, I want to make sure that I can take something back, whether it's the loins, whether it's a hind quarter. I want to take some part of that animal on my first trip back to camp, my first trip back to the vehicle, my first back to wherever, and then I'll switch out to a big frame pack and go get everything else. But a pack is probably my number one, then optics, and then you kind of jump into some other stuff there. Now, I know we have a couple more scouting questions. I want to talk about one more thing as far as gear goes. We talked pack, number one, water, essential supplies. We're actually going to have another video coming up in about a month with a lot of that stuff, so kind of stay tuned. But last thing I want to talk about as far as optics, we talked about binoculars, talked about rangefinders, spotting scope. I want to talk about rifle scopes real quick. Just because I know so many people are purchasing firearms right now, getting ready for upcoming hunts. If you talk to the average hunter, even 5 years ago, but really 10 years ago, everybody got a 3x9x40, a 3x9x50. That's what you got. You pulled 100 hunters in the field, and 90 of them would, hey, what optics you running? I'm running a 3x9x40. It's just what it was. Optics have gotten so much better recently that you now have more magnification. You have more capabilities. In a rifle scope, I want a large diameter bell. So my objective, my overall view, I want large. The biggest reason, I want to see a lot of territory so I can find the animal, and more importantly, I want to let light into my optics. As far as the tube of your rifle scope, so again, we're talking about the center part of your rifle scope. That's called your tube. So in that tube, the smallest they're generally speaking going to be is going to be 1 inch. A very large tube is be as big as 35 millimeter. In regards to that, a larger tube, again, transfers more light. So what I look for in a rifle scope, large diameter objective to bring in that light, a larger tube, and lots of magnification. So a rifle scope like this right here, that's going to be a 5x25x56. But almost all regards, I'm looking for a 4 to 15 or 16, a 5 to 20, 5 to 25. The biggest reason for that, we all go to the range and we all shoot good, right? We go down, we lay on that bench, we shoot. I can punch the bullseye out of that target all day long at 100 yards, right? It's easy. All of a sudden you put an elk there, he's bugling, he's moving around, and at 100 yards, you're shaking like a leaf. It's hard to hold those optics steady. If you're able to zoom in, even at 100 yards, when I crank my scope to 25, all of a sudden, it's like all I see are the vitals on that animal. It's a lot harder to miss, and it's a lot harder to make a bad shot when you have magnification on your side. So for all the new hunters out there, larger objective, let in light, larger tube, get that light in there where you can see at those crucial points of the day, early and late, and magnification is your friend. You don't want to go too overboard as long as the less magnification, so the first number, as long as it's somewhere between 3 and 5, and your upper number is somewhere between 15 and 25, that is the optic for you. So again, you want lots of availability of magnification. I promise it will help. Again, I can go through this feed later and kind of answer some more questions on that, but that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle with optics. Guys, we're running out of time. We're going to talk a couple more scouting questions. We're going to kind of wrap it up for the night, but why I have you all here, remember, guys, this is going to be going on at least once a month. This is the big game hunting series. We're going to carry you through this entire process, so kind of keep that in mind. But what are our last couple scouting questions?
When hunting in high-pressure units, where do animals, deer and elk, typically move to? They've observed that they tend to go to the throat of the drainage. Do you feel like that's a good place to start?
It is. I would say the biggest thing, in a high-pressured area, where do the animals go? They go to where there's less pressure. So on a daily basis, you heard us talk about scouting. If you missed that section, on a daily basis, animals are always going to need food, water, and bedding. So they have to be able to eat. So you have to have grass there, they have to have water for hydration, and they always are going to want some sort of cover to feel safe. So they're never going to miss those things. So when they feel pressure, number one, they're going to go to another area where they don't feel the pressure, but they still have to have those three major features of life. So generally speaking, yes, I would say they're always going to go slightly further away to avoid the pressure, and they're going to go where the pressure's not. So I can't tell you how many times where I've seen these animals go to simply steeper terrain. Sometimes that's the throat of the canyon like we're talking about. Sometimes it's just steeper. Sometimes it's rockier. I think so many of us get in our heads what the average elk or deer wants to live in. But I promise you, they can live in some of the gnarliest country you've ever seen. I mean, the most minor, fluffy-looking mule deer doe can live in some of the craziest mountain goat country that you've ever seen. So again, don't put it past them. So they're always going to move just away from the pressure where you don't think hunters are going to be, or hikers, or wherever the pressure is. They're always going to move to that less pressured area, but they still have to have food, water, and bedding. So I think a lot of people think they strictly move to the dark timber and never come out. If there's not food or water there, they're not going to be there. So food, water, bedding in a less pressured area is where those animals are going to go.
Can you talk about winter versus summer ranges for animals? When does the transition occur, and when do you start scouting for animals?
Absolutely. So again, our big feature for us, we start scouting once the young of the year hit the ground. So I'm not saying it's not good to go out there and scout now, but things change. The biggest feature that keeps these animals in a stable pattern is the young of the year. So when the deer drop their fawns, when the elk drop their calves, by middle of June, that is when I start scouting hard, because those patterns will hold into that September, October time frame. So for me personally, I am majorly starting to scout animals, resource, putting a major focus on that side of the scouting come June. And we're going to walk through that whole process, so just stay with us and we'll kind of walk you through it. But as far as a hard date, mark your calendars, mid-June is 100% major focus on animals. As far as summer patterns, winter patterns, you see a lot of focus on that because they're the longest lasting patterns. So when people are always like, man, I look at maps and it talks about summer patterns and winter patterns, why don't they just tell me where they're at during hunting season? You look at the longer patterns that hold true. So again, we see these animals moving into those areas where they're going to drop the young of the year, in middle to late May, and they're going to hold there all summer. So all of June, all of July, all of August. So those patterns hold very true for a very long period of time. Gives you time to find them, gives you time to scout them. Gives everybody that studies migrational patterns time to observe those patterns. Same as the winter. All of a sudden, those winter herds usually start building up end of November, and they hold there until almost middle or end of March, if not April. So it's the two longest patterns, and that's why you see more studies on that. As far as when do they transition, you see a couple things in transition. Your mule deer have a transition as far as the males go, so the bucks. You see a transition once they lose their velvet. So you're going to see these big deer holding a pattern until they lose velvet. When they lose velvet, they tend to go into thicker country. They kind of spend a little bit more time alone until the rut takes place. So you see a migration or a change when the velvet comes off, and then you see a change again when the rut starts. So it's really kind of a weird phase from somewhere between September 5th and 15th is when they lose the velvet, and then you see that pattern kind of come back to itself when the rutting season starts, middle of November. And those are those transitions there, so keep that in mind. So your mule deer, know you're going to hold a pattern till the velvet comes up. Velvet comes off, know you're going to see a transition. As far as elk go, they're going to hold their pattern true until the breeding season. The elk breeding season, Starts as early September, as late as, you know, early to mid-October. Same thing. Summer patterns are going to hold true. The rut's going to change that. That's all going to be due to your population in the area you're hunting. You have a lot of cows, those animals are going to somewhat stay around there. You have minimal cows, they're going to migrate to where those cows are at, and then you kind of go through the phases of maturity levels, and it kind of breaks things down from there. And again, stay tuned. We're going to follow you through that entire process. Next week, it all starts digital. We're going to walk you through the maps itself. We're going to talk you through all the capabilities that are out there. So next week, we're going to drop a video on digital scouting, and then stay tuned as we get into May, June, and so forth as we walk you through the individual scouting process. And a lot of this is going to be done from the field. No more studio, no more sitting in a nice chair. We're going to be out on the mountainside showing what you need to be and have with you. So kind of keep that in mind. Any other urgent questions right now? Are we good to kind of wrap it up? I'm
going to wrap up with just one last one that I've seen several times when we've had a conversation is, how do you think the fires from last year will affect the animals, and then also drought? We're looking at heading into another drought year.
Absolutely. So fires are a love-hate situation. So obviously, we hate seeing our countryside, our beautiful mountains burn. So it's very negative in those regards. It does push animals around, move animals around, but honestly, it's Mother Nature. So Mother Nature, when they have a burn, you have a burn in an area, even though the immediate impact is drastic, road closures, unit closures, closing the hunting areas, and all of those type impacts, by now, as long as you have a year or so after, you're going to get new growth. You're going to get a lot of new things that are actually going to draw the animals back. And honestly, a lot of times you're going to see an increase in animal and wildlife population because of the new growth. So overall, fires are going to be a good thing because of the new growth. Now, it does change things up. So when I hunt a burn area, which I've done a lot of, honestly, it'll surprise you to where before the area burned, you were hunting an animal where the bedding ground was this thick, dark, nasty, timber tree side. And now all of a sudden they're bedding down in little shelves of rock because it's the only thing that offers shade and cover. So it does change things up, but in reality, I would say a fire is definitely not something to avoid. Obviously, make sure that the roads are open, make sure your access is open, because that's one of the biggest things. Obviously, when a fire gets put out, as a hunter, we're like, oh, we're good to go back in there. But you don't think about the logs falling down and just so much of the things that change. So everybody wants to make sure the hunters are safe. So make sure the area is open to access, make sure the roads are open. But as far as overall impact, the new grass and new growth is going to be a very welcoming sign to animals. And I think you're going to see a massive influx of wildlife in those areas. And I will say that you do see a boost on antler growth. Not that we're just out there for that, but it is a true fact that you will see an increase in antler size following a burn due to the nutrition and the minerals available to these animals that weren't there before. So fires, overall, I would say it's a good thing. Get through that situation, and more so going forth, it's going to be a drought year. More than, I'd say, talking about droughts, we'll talk about that in scouting. Let's be safe. I think so many of us are going to go out there scouting. We get out there and, we always want to have a campfire. Let's be a safer, more conservative hunter than we've ever been in history. So let's be very cautious. Make sure that when we're riding our ATVs, we're not parking over grass with hot exhaust. Make sure that, any sort of thing, any ignition at all, campfires, stoves, whatever, let's make sure everything is dealt with in a very proper and just honor the wildlife out there and the situation. So let's make sure that we take fires more serious than we ever have in history, and let's just all go forth and have a great time. Again, my name is Nate Zelinsky. This is the Big Game Hunting Series brought to you by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a whole digital scouting content dropped for you, and coming forth all summer, we're going to walk you through the entire process of being a more successful big game hunter here in Colorado. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We'll see you next week.